things in life for free, but you can give them to the birds and bees. I want money.
Alright, so let's get this right out of the way. Clearly I'm just some asshole that wants free things. I'm obviously just some salty player who wants everything given to me in a free game, and I don't understand the economy or how Riot makes money on their incredibly successful game. I also don't understand how microtransaction models work. So let me open up this video by responding to all of these claims. I have over 3,000 games of League of Legends, I have every champion in the game, and before the rework I actually had 10 rune pages, and I have a stable job that allows me to buy whatever I want in League without it meaning that I can't afford food or shelter for the month. I also don't want Riot to go under or lose a very profitable side of their business model. I understand that in a game that is ostensibly free, they have to find ways of making money, and that these will almost always be seen as unsavory to the player base. So with all of that said, I hope it's clear that I don't have much to personally gain when it comes to champions being behind a paywall. Despite this, I think that Riot's decision to not have all champions available to all players is not only annoying, but actually ineffective when it comes to their ability to make money. So let's explore this a little bit more deeply, because you might be thinking, how does them forcing players to pay for champions somehow make them less money than if they gave them away for free? So glad that you asked, Steven. It's because, believe it or not, if someone likes your game, chances are they'll spend money on it regardless. A lot of developers have already realized this, as there's many people that identify based on the types of games that they play. Lots of people are RPG fans or MOBA fans, they want to show that off in-game with cosmetics. In a more granular sense, in League of Legends you have Draven mains or Aatrox mains, and the best way for them to show off their commitment to that champion is to purchase a skin that'll show off how much they play that character. When I first played League, I was atrocious. I bought the wrong items, I played characters wrong, and generally I lost more than I won. I remember telling my friends that there was no way in the world that I'd end up spending money on the game, but as I played Ezreal bot lane and got better and better, I began to feel connected to the character. So much so that the first skin that I bought was Pulsefire Ezreal. Now unfortunately for my wallet, this also wasn't my last skin purchase either, as I'm now too afraid to tally up just how much I've spent on this free game. It should be noted though that I didn't buy the Ezreal skin because I felt that I needed to in order to sustain some kind of competitive advantage, or because I felt manipulated into buying it. I bought it because I thought Ezreal was fun and I wanted to look cool while I played him. Now I can definitely attest to the frustration that I felt while grinding for that next new champion. It felt really shitty to be in a ranked lobby and have to play this game of bingo when it came to whether or not I could swap for a champion. Even worse, at the time that I played, things like rune pages and runes still cost IP. So not only did you have to deal with being at a disadvantage because you didn't have all of the characters, but even if you did, you might not have the MS or CDR runes for a character like Riven. Worst of all, Riot actually made these more niche builds like the aforementioned CDR runes build incredibly expensive. If all of that wasn't bad enough, you also had to make sure that you had enough rune pages to encompass the amount of roles that you actually played. Otherwise you might have these MS quints, but you might not have them slotted into your active rune pages. You could argue that runes and rune pages were actually only in the game as a way of forcing players to spend their IP on runes instead of champions. It acted as a form of opportunity cost to the player. Runes couldn't be purchased with money, which meant that if you were sitting on 6,300 IP, you had to decide whether or not you wanted to play a fun new champion with a suboptimal rune set, or buy the champion with real-world cash and have enough IP left over for the optimal build. This felt incredibly skeezy to me because it openly admitted that players would feel at a disadvantage if they didn't have the right runes or champions, and it used that very feeling to compel them to buy content. Now thankfully, Riot's moved away from this model and runes are now free, but I definitely foresee a time where the community will come together and look back at champions being behind a paywall and treat it with the same level of embarrassment that runes were. Oh, and if anyone tries to get smart and tell you something like, not having all the champions isn't putting you at a disadvantage, they're lying to you. Of course it puts you at a disadvantage if you don't own all of the champions. You literally have less options at your disposal as a new player than a veteran that does. Oh man, he's playing Jhin, you know what would be a great counter to that? Draven. Oh, I don't have him because he's 6,300. This is intentional. Riot wants you to feel as though you're playing with a handicap because that's how you get fed up enough to buy a champion with real money. And for some players that might actually work, but for others it'll just get them so frustrated that they end up quitting in favor of the other widely successful MOBA that gives them access to the entire roster from the start. So let's talk about the way that League system works. If you're someone who's never played a MOBA before, the barrier for entry is incredibly large in League of Legends. At the time of writing this, there are 141 champs in League, each with their own distinct abilities, not to mention their passives and power spikes. So when you first boot up a game, you're not only learning how to play a MOBA for the first time, but you're learning an encyclopedia of characters as well. For players that attempt to switch over from Dota, they'll have to become acquainted with the differences between the games. They'll learn that they can't deny last hits or have items delivered via courier, and most importantly, they'll also have to learn that they won't have access to the full roster of characters, unlike Dota. And you can already see that this is a huge investment for a game that you could argue these players aren't even positive that they care about yet. I could already foresee a lot of players cutting their losses at this point, but even in the circumstance where these players tough it out, there's really no good way to find out what champions you like apart from random chance. You can either get a champ shard in a randomly dropped loot box to rent, or you can hope to find something during the free week. I legitimately wonder how many players out there quit the game because they got a bad dice roll and simply weren't given a champion that they liked. I know it really sucked when I first started playing because I wanted to play Marksman, but the only one that was available during free week was Ashe, which at the time of Assassins and Black Cleaver wasn't in a good spot. This isn't even mentioning the chance that a new player might save up 6300 blue essence, buy a champion after seeing other people play them, only to be pissed off when it doesn't play how they expected it to. This actually happened to me when I bought Callista, because one week I saw a lot of people playing her on stream. I bought her and immediately regretted it, but because there's no way to try out a champion before you buy them, too bad for me. To put this into perspective, that's 63 games that you played to earn that champion, assuming that you didn't lose a single one. With Blue Essence it's slightly different, but the earn rates are pretty similar. So let's be kind and say that you only played 50 games to earn that champion, and you find out that you don't like them. Now if you're like me and you already have a stable roster of champions, that's fine, but if you're a new player who's literally at the mercy of a free champion rotation every week, I'll just come out and say it, this really fucking sucks. And I wouldn't look down on anyone who chose to quit after that. I guess you could use a refund token, but you get 3 of those for the entire life cycle of your account. And that doesn't guarantee that this won't just happen again because you have 140 more champions to go. I genuinely wonder if Riot believes that players should only be allowed to make educated decisions on what champions they buy if they've already been featured in the free week. Which is insane because I've played 500 games of Draven, you could say that he's one of my favorite characters, but if I was a new player who wanted to try him out before I bought him, I'd have been waiting a literal year since the last time he was in rotation. Now I live in the real world, I pay bills, I work a job, and I have expenses. I understand that Riot is a company that needs to make money, but there are some people out there that genuinely believe that companies like Riot have this magic formula that tells them how to make every right move and how to extract the most amount of money when it comes to their player base. Essentially, there are people out there that believe that Riot can do no wrong, and for those people I'll point out one thing. Remember dynamic queue? Remember when Riot was absolutely certain that the future of the game was in the ability to play with your friends in ranked? So much so that they actually merged solo and flex queue? Do you remember how even pro players and streamers began to contemplate whether Riot actually knew what they were doing?
I'm kind of interested, like, what your guys' experiences have been playing dynamic queue. I know that
it's awful.
Remember when Riot attempted to double down on flex queue before they finally acquiesced when they realized it was only going to get worse? Riot isn't perfect. In fact, up until recently, they weren't even mediocre when it came to running their game. Their client was still running on Adobe Air, they didn't have replays, they didn't have the ability to show you what skins you purchased, and they had outdated ways of monetizing their game. I point this out because it's clear that even in its current state, they don't even take the opportunity to explore revenue streams that could be incredibly profitable without much work on their part. For example, they still haven't introduced custom announcer packs like you see in Dota 2. I actually really love the GLaDOS announcer pack in that game.
Those people had families. Great teamwork, you vicious thugs.
And this is super strange to me because they've already shown that they have the capability for something like this through timed events that featured things like the Gangplank or Thresh announcer. I actually really like the Gangplank voiceover, for example, and would have 100% shelled out $10 if it meant replacing my default announcer. Or what about custom versions of minions or themed versions of Summoner's Rift? You could argue that this would ruin the competitive integrity of the game, but if you're okay with people not having access to the entire roster of champions, this shouldn't really be a problem to you. Or why not allow third-party resellers to sell League of Legends merch? I'll admit that the merch site has actually improved quite a bit in the past 2 years because you can actually buy things now unlike before. It's just too bad that they're incredibly overpriced to a point where a t-shirt actually costs you $33 before shipping. You might actually think this is an incredibly savvy move on Riot's part because they're exploiting those die-hard fans that just need a League of Legends shirt, but you know how I know that isn't true? Because I've never seen a single person with a League of Legends branded t-shirt, bag, pin, or plushie in the real world. I don't live in California, I live in Canada, but I've seen team shirts for things like Cloud9 or TSM, but I've never in my life seen a single piece of Riot branded merchandise outside of their website. And this isn't some obscure game with a few fans, this is a game with over 100 million active players each month. As I mentioned before, I live in Canada, so that's about 3 times our population, and yet I haven't seen a single person proudly wearing an Echo shirt or have a Poro pin on their bag. Now this is purely anecdotal, but I know there are people like me who wouldn't mind having a League of Legends poster in their den, or a minimalist t-shirt of their favorite character, With over 100 million players, there's already a huge market for this kind of stuff, which is why it's so insane to me that it's not something Riot's chosen to focus on. Now the reason I bring any of this up is to illustrate that Riot is not some infallible company that can do no wrong. It should go without saying, but anytime this is brought up when people criticize the way that Riot manages their microtransactions, there will inevitably be someone in the comments section that goes, "Yeah, sure buddy, like some asshole on the internet knows what's best for Riot more than they do." Again, yes, in some circumstances the collective player base of a game might know what's best for the game more than the developers do. Because just like the player base, the developers are human too, and ironically enough, they can become incredibly insulated as well. Dynamic queue should be an example of just that. So let's get back on track and discuss how Champions being behind a paywall actually loses Riot money. Let me refine my argument here because I think it's a little bit too broad. I think in its current state, the way that Riot blocks Champions behind an IP or RP paywall actually inhibits their ability to gain new players. This presents a real problem to Riot because, for those that didn't know, it's actually owned by a Chinese conglomerate named Tencent Holdings. This means that Riot has a large company to answer to, one that has shareholders and expectations that they'll be making more money in their current year to date than the last one. It doesn't matter that Riot has 100 million players or $1.6 billion in revenue if they stagnate, or worse, make less money than they did the year before. Every year needs to see an increase in revenue and profit, where more players are buying more champions or more skins. So this presents a bit of a conundrum here. You have this game in which you want to be inviting to new players because you want your player base to grow along with your profits, but you also have to find a way to gently nudge these players into buying your content, whether that be skins, champions, or emotes. The reason why I think this is incredibly stupid to force players to either buy or grind for new champions is because this will inevitably lead to many players becoming so frustrated that they simply quit the game altogether. These are potential customers that may have been willing to spend hundreds of dollars on things they actually saw value in, such as skins. The core problem is that while cosmetic content feels like an actual reward to the player, champions on the other hand feel like something that we should just have access to from the get-go. When you buy a champion with real money, you might be excited to play them, but you'll also feel as though you just wasted $10 on what could have been something that you actually saw value in, like a skin or emote. Buying a champion feels transparently gross because you know that you're paying money for something that affects your ability to play the game. This is the same thing that more contemporary titles like Battlefront 2 have been lambasted for. I feel a sense of pride and accomplishment because I own all of the champions. This just comes off as incredibly hypocritical from a company that seems to endlessly talk about competitive integrity, especially when it paradoxically handicaps new players for simply not having played the game enough. This might feel as though I'm being overly dramatic when it comes to something many players have already gone through. I mean, I grinded 160 champions, and why shouldn't you? Well, because if you're Riot, you want new players to actually play your game, right? If you've never played League of Legends with a friend who's just starting out, let me paint a picture for you. I recently began playing League with my girlfriend. We'd play bots versus AI because everyone was just really toxic to her if we didn't play bot lane together, but that's a whole other issue. So every time we'd boot up the game, she'd get to see one of the champions that I was playing. I actually played Janna initially, and she really liked how she looked and played, so she played her for a bit and that was a lot of fun. But then after a while, she saw me playing Twitch, which she referred to as Trash Rat, which was kind of great. So she asks me, "Hey, can I play that?" Now, thankfully I have an account that has all of the champions, so I can let her play on my account. Oh god. But at a certain point she wanted to play games on her own. She didn't want to play on the account that I had because she wanted to earn champions for herself. But as time went on and as she realized that each game would only net her about 60 to 80 IP, she quickly got fed up with this grind. She didn't want to have to spend hundreds of hours getting enough IP in order to play the champions that she thought looked cool. And she certainly wasn't invested enough at this point to buy champions, so after a few weeks, she quit. This sucks for both me and Riot, because now I don't get to play with her, and Riot's model was so uninviting that it pushed someone out that I guarantee would have spent money on RP for skins and emotes. Now again, the response to this might be that the system is working as intended. Riot's done the calculation after all, and it says that my girlfriend is an acceptable loss. That 1 of every 5 players will stick it out and buy champions, which makes this all okay. But why have this calculation at all? If you're able to retain even 50% more players by not gating champions off, wouldn't it be worth it? Because that's 50% more players that have the potential to buy your content. Of course, you might want the whales that will buy all of your content, but there's already enough content for whales without the need for them to purchase champions. For those that don't already know, whales are a term that game devs use to describe people with addictive personalities that get way too invested way too quickly when it comes to games with microtransactions. There are stories of whales spending thousands of dollars on games like Candy Crush because they can't stop themselves. But even if Riot wants to target these types of people, it's actually more advantageous to give them access to every champion immediately so they can buy multiple skins more quickly. For example, if you're a whale, you'd spend something like $700 on all of the champions in League, but alternatively, you could spend upward of $4,230 for all of the skins for all of the champions. For the regular player base, it also makes little sense to lock off all champions from the start as well. Look at it this way, if you're someone who doesn't see value in purchasing champions, you'll only buy skins for the champions that you own. So you'll buy 1 or 2 skins per champion, which is likely only about half a dozen or so when you first start out. Now imagine that the same player has access to every champion. Of course, they won't like every champion that they play or buy skins for every single one, but having the ability to actually try out every champion means that they'll likely play more, and that means that there will actually be more reason for them to buy more skins. This isn't isolated either. A lot of the time these players might recommend the game to a friend or get invested in the LCS or professional teams or players. This raises the literal ceiling for the amount of money that League of Legends can net. It's almost exponential at this point. Or if you're short-sighted, you might say, no, I only want players that are going to buy champions. I don't care if the players are going to spend money on my game if it's not on champions. So instead of having 3 of 5 players stick it out with your game, you'll only have 1, but I guess he buys champions, so A-okay. But I mean, that's just my opinion. It's not like I have a master's degree when it comes to economics or anything. That's not a joke, I really don't. Now I'll be the first to admit that removing champions could lead to a lack of incentive for players to log in every day. After all, the way that League is currently structured is for Blue Essence to be the thing that gets players coming back, most often to be able to afford that next new champion. So how do you sustain that feeling without champions being the carrot on the stick? Well, there are a couple of resources that Riot could use in order to reward players on a more consistent basis. For example, chromas could be expanded and cost a few thousand Blue Essence. You could also have custom animations for characters, or you could introduce missions for each champion to showcase your skills with your main. These could take the form of achievements that you could display on your profile like a badge, something like, as Draven catch 10 consecutive axes, or as Alistar knock up 3 people with 1 combo. These could progressively get more and more difficult as you level up your character and culminate in a unique icon or a piece of content. This might sound silly, but back in Warcraft 3, I remember playing 1500 games as human, and when I got that Jaina icon, I was fucking pumped. At the end of the day, these are just ideas. There's something that I came up with when I was creating this video, but they're a solution to a problem that I feel has the potential to hinder League's ability to grow and to remain successful. Now this video did seem very doom and gloom, but in all honesty, Riot has been improving steadily since the departure of FlexQ. As I mentioned before, we have replays now. We have a new client that isn't perfect, but is a far cry from how terrible Adobe Air was. I know that Riot can make the right call, but just like getting new players to buy their content, they sometimes need a nudge in the right direction. Thanks for watching the video, guys. I really appreciate it. I've spent the last week of my vacation actually doing this, and big shoutouts to my girlfriend and my dog for being patient with me while I do that. I really do love League of Legends, that's why I made the video in the first place. If you like this kind of video, then we also have videos on the channel for things like Deus Ex and for Far Cry. So yeah, maybe check those out and like and subscribe if you like the content itself. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. I'll catch you. Like and subscribe.